This is the Active Commercial Real Estate Investing Show, a podcast designed explicitly for the ambitious commercial real estate investor who wants to generate outsized returns. Hello and welcome to the Active Commercial Real Estate Investing Show, brought to you by the one and only School of Commercial Real Estate Investing. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Noelle.
And this is episode number 2.
Yay! Episode 2. So excited. But before we jump in, I do want to preface today's episode is going to be a little bit more informative. We are planning on having guests come in, but we did want to set some foundational tones before jumping into some of those conversations, just knowing, and if you listen to our last episode, you heard us talking about the fact that we are newer to commercial real estate and we recognize that there might be other people in a similar stage in their journey to us. So we want to take a second to ground us and help people get familiar in the types of commercial real estate, because there are so many different options when it comes to commercial. So this will be a little educational, hopefully some light banter, but I know we want to make sure that people have the information and they can start researching based on what sounds interesting to them.
Commercial real estate is definitely designed to generate revenue, but I think one of the fascinating things about it, at least to me, is that the way each property can generate revenue on the commercial side of things looks very different than on the residential side of things, right? So on the residential side of things, you basically have tenants who need a place to live and they rent a space from you to live. On commercial, that can still be true, especially in the multifamily category, but there are many more categories that generate revenue from a variety of different businesses. So each property can generate revenue from a multitude of business types and forms. So in this episode, we're going to cover the main types of commercial real estate property, so that if you're new to this, you can start to understand what different categories look like and what different asset classes look like in the commercial space.
Yeah. And I think coming from residential, you just mentioned it, but let's talk about the obvious one, and that's multifamily. But multifamily is residential if it's 4 units or under, right? If you're talking about a quadruplex, that is considered residential. Now, if you're talking anything that is 5 units or more, that's when we start to move into the commercial real estate zone of things. So I think that is an important distinction. And obviously, one of the first things that people probably come to mind when they think about commercial is large apartment buildings and condo, units and things that are large and in charge, but still people living in them, having individual leases, and renting out for residential purposes. So I think when you're thinking about residential space, typically that's considered small multifamily, right? But then when you start getting into commercial, that's when we talk the big guys.
I think this category of commercial tends to be one of the more common transitions. If you're coming from investing in residential real estate, it can be an easier transition into the commercial side of things, because if you've been acquiring and renting out single family homes, then the model is very similar in terms of a management perspective. Yes, there are bigger numbers you have to deal with. Yes, there are some additional layers of legality that you have to be focused on, and some different approaches and processes when it comes to the acquisition itself. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of operating the building, you are still looking at one-to-one leases for each individual unit, and it's still largely the same service that you're providing to the end customer. So I think this makes for a pretty natural transition for a lot of individuals who are already investing in residential, single-family home, or small multifamily properties.
Yeah, definitely a more comfortable space for people who are coming in from residential. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the second category or asset class of commercial that we wanted to talk about today is office space. So this is where you start to see a pretty big separation between residential and commercial. There's no such thing as residential office space or residential loans for office spaces, right? As soon as you start talking office space property or buildings, you're looking at commercial debt and commercial debt products to secure and acquire those types of buildings. Office spaces are typically found in downtown areas where there's a heavy business district, but you can also find them in smaller properties in the suburban areas or even rural areas, but they always tend to be kind of focused in that downtown area. So if that downtown area is massive and it's New York City, there's a lot of office building there. If you're in a more rural town and you still have a little downtown square, you'll probably see some office buildings spread around there, in larger, I guess, commercial corridors of the town, regardless of how big it is. So these are obviously buildings that businesses will rent out. They can be anything from a very small footprint to house a couple of employees, all the way to multi-level buildings with thousands of employees inside. So they can be split up in a variety of different ways, but the crux of office space is to be used as office space for businesses.
Yeah. The third type that we're going to talk about, our asset category, is industrial. So industrial is used by businesses for developing, manufacturing, storing, or distributing goods and products. So for me, the easiest way to think about this is a very large Fortune 500 distribution center to make sure that you can get your goods next day or within a day, as long as you have their ultimate subscription product. I will stray away. I will try and keep names out of this, but I think that is a really easy way to look at industrial space. I mean, we're talking about buildings that are typically empty, not being built out for commerce. So we talked last time about fast food, right? Like, we're not talking about a building that then someone's going in and constructing for fast food. We're talking about potentially even self-storage, something that's empty, something that is being used for hosting products, getting products out, having products come in as well. Typically, unlike office space, these are not going to be high rise. These are very often low rise buildings, tons of unfurnished space, large enough for equipment as well as storing of goods and products, which, sounds like fun. Here, have this nice, lovely empty building that hopefully requires no work and effort to be able to upkeep.
Yeah. And I think similar to office, industrial can look very different depending on where it's located and the purpose it's being used for. And I think arguably more so than office, industrial actually has a wider variety of potential uses. So if you think of industrial and you think of like a big warehouse or a big manufacturing plant, that certainly qualifies as industrial. There are other forms of industrial that are equally needed and arguably more popular amongst the public, such as flex space industrial. So flex space industrial can be a large low-rise building that then someone like a pickleball company comes in and rents out, and they install 8 pickleball courses inside of this industrial building. And now it is an entertainment-based business inside of an industrial building, right? So that absolutely qualifies as an industrial property. And that may not be something like a business you may typically expect to rent an industrial property, but is a very common and popular business at this moment in time, renting industrial property.
Yeah, well, especially for pickleball, given its increase in popularity here recently. Doesn't matter your age, guys. If you are looking for a hobby, apparently pickleball is the one to pick up right now.
Yeah. And the next property we're going to get into is retail. And so retail is property designed primarily for commerce businesses, right? So this can be anything from a strip mall that houses massage spas and liquor stores. It can also be standalone buildings, that have their own, let's say like a jewelry store. It wants a big footprint. They can buy their own retail store or rent their own retail store as a standalone building. But the primary thing to think about here is just the notion of a building that provides easy access for the consumer to show up, purchase what they want, same day, on the spot, and leave.
Yeah. I think key for retail here is think about your local strip mall. You're walking in, there are multiple different business types, but they are all retail based. They have something to offer to the consumer, to your point, right then and there as you walk in, or have a reservation if it's a spa type of business as well. I mean, who doesn't love shopping in some retail space?
And one thing to
um,
note as we go through all of these is a lot of city planning also revolves around these categories or these asset classes, right? So if you look at a larger metropolitan area specifically, you'll often see like an industrial park area, and you'll see a handful of retail, like heavy concentrated retail areas where they try to encourage people to go shopping and to eat out and all of that type of stuff. Then you'll see areas that are primarily reserved for multifamily, for people to live and get their daily exercise in at a local park that's right across the street or whatever the case is. So I would say these categories and asset classes are important for commercial real estate investors to understand and be thinking about. And they're also very important for city planners to be thinking about, and how each of them kind of play off of one another, right? Like if you have an area of a city dedicated to multifamily housing, then you probably want some retail nearby and some hospitality nearby, which we're going to get into next, because that's what people who are living want within close proximity. It's not always a great idea to have a big multifamily neighborhood right next to a heavy industrial area. So what you'll see a lot of times is cities will plan a big multifamily area and then a retail or special purpose area with that type of zoning to act as a buffer between the residential and industrial areas, just to help kind of keep those areas separate, so you're not living right next to a dog food manufacturing plant, which may smell from time to time. We have one of those up in Denver, and you can definitely smell it. They definitely have some houses nearby, and if the wind's blowing in the right direction, it's coming inside your house, and there's not much you can do about it. So I think more and more cities are becoming more and more conscious of how to plan and zone these different areas to maximize the quality of life within the city.
I was about to apologize to everyone that is on that I-70 corridor that gets a whiff of that factory, and now they're doing a ton of construction there too. So that's a very good point, and very important to think about as well. Like when you are going in, and you want to be thinking about that as an investor as well. Where are a lot of multifamilies going in? If they're going in and up first, there's a good chance that some other commercial opportunities are going to follow suit after that. So definitely something to be thinking about if you're looking in the new development space. And of course, you got my segue perfectly from talking about city planning, which what is more important to cities than hospitality? Because we need to talk about how we're bringing in a lot of extra money, not just from the people who live there, but for the people who are visiting. So if you're not familiar with hospitality, hopefully you are. If you're not, you need to get out and travel a little bit more. Traveling is essential and crucial to mental health. At least it is for us. So we're talking about serving those travelers, whether it's for business or for pleasure. So you can go anywhere from Vegas, where you are lined with hotels and casinos, even boutique motels, all the way to we're in and around the airport, and you have all of the big name hotels for people who are in and out for conferences, depending on what that city is. So hospitality is really important. And, obviously there are a lot of large names in hospitality, but there are also a lot of small opportunities in hospitality. And I think this motel takeover is becoming so popular right now. I mean, you see, shows on Netflix about it, and you see a lot of ones coming up for sale as well that might feel a little bit more boutique like. So as we're talking about the variation of investors listening right now, whether you're new or you have tons of money to be able to invest in something that's a little larger. Like this might actually be something similar to multifamily, where it almost feels a little bit more accessible if you're coming from the residential side, because it does have a lot of similarities to residential real estate or more like short term rental real estate.
Hmm. Yeah. And as we think about people coming and visiting and wanting to be entertained, that segues into the next category or asset class of commercial real estate, which is special purpose. So these properties are fun because they're very unique. And the name derives from the notion that these properties have very specific or very special purposes. So these types of properties include things like amusement parks or bowling alleys or movie theaters, churches, zoos, that type of stuff. They're properties that have a very specific use by design. And if they were to be converted into anything else, it would be very difficult to take the existing structure or layout as is and convert it into something else, right? So one thing that we're seeing now with so many office vacancies post-COVID is a lot of developers going in and buying vacant office space and converting it into multifamily space. Yes, it's a costly renovation, but there's in many cities, there's a shortage of multifamily stock. And so what people are doing is converting vacant office into multifamily and providing new inventory, right? If you were to do that with something like a bowling alley or an amusement park, it'd be much more challenging. You'd have to rip out a lot more. You'd have to convert a lot more things. In the case of an amusement park, there often aren't existing structures in the park that would really accommodate multifamily well, for example, or industrial for that case, right? Or other categories. So these are just properties that are designed for a very specific business purpose and don't have as much utility outside of that particular purpose.
I can't wait the next time I go on to the world's greatest short-term rental marketplace. You know how they have the unique stays. I can't wait to type in amusement park and see what shows up, what people can actually do to convert that. But you're absolutely right. That is not a very obvious choice to be converting, and something that is a special use indeed.
I would not be surprised if someone has converted a teacup ride into a spinning geodome stay of some sort.
Or a restaurant, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and as we talk about special use, I think that's a great segue into the next asset class, which is land, because you need land for all of these things. If you don't have the land, you're not going to have the property. So land can be used in its raw form, agricultural or farming businesses. It can also be developed for houses or other types of commercial properties like industrial, multifamily, hospitality, or retail. I think core of this is we'll get into how to do research and how to know, is this land going to be something that is viable? Is this a good opportunity? It's not something that you automatically purchase and can turn around within a short amount of time to generate rent on necessarily, or generate any sort of capital or growth in finances. But you got to have the land to do all of these things. So it is very important. It's a crucial part of being able to invest, and someone owns that land. Sometimes you can own that land with your property. Other times someone else owns that land. So it is important to dig into those things as well.
Mm-hmm. And finally, as we wrap up this episode, there's another category or asset class of commercial real estate, which actually combines multiple asset classes or categories of commercial real estate. And that's called mixed use property. And a mixed use property is basically when you're taking two different types of real estate and you're merging them together. I think one of the most familiar properties that comes to mind in the mixed use arena is a property that is located towards a downtown area where there's some common foot traffic, and you'll see retail on the first level, maybe the first and second level, but then above it you have apartments, right? So that's combining multifamily and retail together in one property, and that would be considered mixed use. Similar, you could see retail on the first floor and office buildings on floors, 2 through 6, and then apartments floors 7 through 10, whatever the case is. But when you start mixing and matching like that in a single property, that's when you get into the mixed use category.
Yeah. And that wraps up the different categories that you should know about as you are in or getting into your journey of commercial real estate. And I don't know that we addressed it at the beginning, but if you don't know, like, what is commercial real estate? By definition, it's property used for the purpose of commerce or revenue generation. So keep that in mind. I mean, who doesn't want some revenue generation going on? I know we do. So these 8 technically different types all serve a very unique purpose, which we have talked through, and then you can combine several different types, and there's not just one. Obviously, we have people who specialize in a certain aspect of commercial real estate, but there are so many options and so many ways that you can mix these to make them work for what you're looking for and what your ultimate goal is.
Yeah.
And I know,
So,
Patrick, you wrote an article as well that goes into this for School of Commercial Real Estate Investing. So we will put a link to that article in the show notes as well, so that you have it to reference later on. And you can bookmark that, save it, so that if you're ever like, what was that thing that they talked about again? You can go back and check it out. And that way you have all of the resources at your fingertips.
yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That does it for this episode. We appreciate you listening and watching wherever you're listening or watching. Be sure to subscribe, and if you haven't visited the website yet, also be sure to go over to schoolofcrei.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Active Commercial Real Estate Investing Show, brought to you by the one and only School of Commercial Real Estate Investing. Be sure to head over to our website at www.schoolofcrei.com for more free resources. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss a thing.